Now, please welcome to the stage Dr. Dawn Haynie, ASID Research Fellow.
We want to welcome you this evening and appreciate you staying with us and sticking with us to the end of the day. I know it's been a great show, at least for me so far, and I'm looking forward to hearing what our panelists have to say and the insights that they have to share. So thank you for coming. I'm delighted to be here today, and I'm excited about this discussion. As I said, we're going to talk about the trends and how they're impacting design. First, I'd like to thank Sherwin-Williams for our sponsor. It's sponsorship like theirs that allow us to bring these kinds of reports to you, and we really appreciate their continued support. And I'd like to thank NeoCon for inviting us to participate and for giving us this opportunity. And particularly, I'd love to thank Nubia, who's been there and has been flexible as we have modified and changed this presentation. In terms of format, I just want to let you know that I'm going to kick it off by giving you a little brief overview of some of the trends that we've seen. You can find them in our trends report on our website. We'll have a link at the end that you can a QR code that you can utilize to see the rest of the trends. But I'm going to set the context, and then I'm going to shift it over to Khoi, who's going to then lead our panelists in a discussion, get deeper into these concepts. And we're going to reserve time at the end and hopefully open it up to you guys to answer questions that you may have for the panelists. So earlier this year, ASID published a catalog, of the latest ways in which we're all living, learning, working, playing, and healing, And we're seeing notions of comfort, connection, and the blurring of many established sectors of practice impacting design in transformative ways. So for today's discussion, we're going to lean into a few of these, So consumers' desire for comfort and connection isn't surprising. It's more than just a reaction to the isolation of the pandemic. American households are shifting. According to the US Census Bureau, the percentage of one-person households or single households has increased every decade since 1940. And recently, it's reached more than 1 in 4 households. So we're seeing people of all ages and all stages across the entire country seeking camaraderie and comfort in spaces that foster a sense of community and connection, not only at home, but also at work. It's not just the baby boomers that want to work in the office. When surveyed, nearly 90% of emerging professionals wanted to work in the office and meet frequently with their coworkers, So they're looking for interaction, mentoring, which is really important, as we know, and networking opportunities as they think through their next steps in their career. But they want it with flexibility, and of course we know they don't want it 5 days a week. And so hybrid is the new normal, So I've heard several panel discussions and several talks throughout this event talking about that, And so employers are acknowledging their challenges with remote work and reconciling employee expectations of flexibility. They're often tailoring their workplaces and policies to better support corporate culture and the user or guest experiences, if I borrow a term from Bob's opening keynote, shifting towards that guest experience. As interior designers, we know that in-person interactions matter, and recently our intuitions and lived experiences were confirmed in a research study by Yale University and the University College London. They found that virtual meetings resulted in lower levels of brain activity and social stimulation, demonstrating explicitly that virtual and in-person encounters are meaningfully different to our brains. And so to better support in-person interactions, many companies and designers are rethinking and redesigning spaces, seeking a balance between informal collaborative spaces and areas of flexibility, Offering employees an opportunity to change environments to better support their needs, personal preferences, and neurodiversity. Many employers, including those in healthcare, are promoting mindful practices, thinking more holistically about employee well-being to help alleviate staff burnout in particular. But it's not just about the staff. We're seeing primary care providers prioritizing preventative approaches, workplace as well. And they're encouraging stair use, kinds of things to get us up and moving, healthy choices in food and nutrition. And they're trying to enrich the patient experience. So this is all leading us to this concept of cross-specialty design, which we've also heard a lot about this week. So the lines, which have traditionally divided our various areas of expertise and market sectors, are increasingly blurring, particularly as places where we live, work, and play become less clear. Market sectors are increasingly blending and borrowing solutions from one another to solve complex challenges and rethink the user experiences. We're seeing hospitality lean into residential designers, asking their advice on how to create a more homey, enriched patient room, for example. We're seeing office borrow from residential as well. So we're seeing a lot of mix between all of these different traditional practice sectors and real blending as we see through the solutions of the design awards. Similarly, many designers are increasingly recognizing the interconnectedness, right, of individual health, community health, and environmental stewardship, particularly after the pandemic, and with 2/3 of Americans reporting that they've experienced one of the extreme weather events, such as a tornado or a hurricane, a wildfire perhaps, or just a heat wave, right? In just this past year. So 2/3 of Americans just this past year have experienced extreme weather. So it's not surprising that they're asking for us to sort of help address them. And lastly, related to business, right? So clients are reaching out, they're asking us for help. And with increased competition and a need for new marketing strategies, we're seeing thought leaders embedded as an integral part of a digital marketing strategy for firms. Many are utilizing their own employees as an authentic way to offer expertise and insights. And artificial intelligence, although has some challenges, is actually offering us unique opportunities for more personalized engagement with users. And so now to help us look deeper at these trends, I'd like to transition to our panel, right?
Excuse me.
Surprise.
Little musical chairs. And also in addition, I'd like to say, it was little musical chairs here, but also Leah Bauer, who was supposed to join us, is sick and was unable to fly. She let me know last night. And so David has generously stepped in and helped us complete our panel today. So just a quick introduction. So in addition to Khoi Vo, who is our CEO of ASID, I'd like to introduce Julia Calabrese. She's an Associate Director of Strategy and Design at Interior Architects, which is an award-winning global interior design and architecture firm. She's responsible for crafting immersive brand experiences that keep the physical and psychological needs of users at the forefront, right? She has a high level of experiential design expertise, given her role as Global Design Manager and Workplace for retail at Ford Motor Company previously, and she's published, she's award-winning, she's a multidisciplinary designer. She's a jack of all trades. And she's been named one of Retail Touchpoint's 40 Under 40 Innovators and ASID's Ones to Watch. And in 2022, she was awarded Interior Design Magazine's Best of the Year project. Thank you. Next to her, we have David Usher, who is the Vice President and Leader of Interiors at Corgan. He's drawn to both the beauty and complexity of architecture, and David leads, coaches, and mentors a team of talented interior designers, sharing more than 30 years of experience. He's designed and led projects spanning multiple sectors across the US and abroad, and he approaches each project with a desire to create a space for belonging and improving the well-being of the people served by the space. Human-centered design at its best, right? And he is chair-elect for the National Board of Directors at ASID. Thank you, David. And last but not least, we have Margi Kaminski, who is a co-director at CannonDesign's Health Interiors practice. She supports markets initiatives and strategy focusing on business growth and client engagement. And she too has over 30 years of experience in practice, leading a wide range of notable projects for many healthcare industry's leading systems, right? So she's worked for Kaiser Permanente, Northwestern Medicine, and Penn State Health. She brings a fresh perspective to the team, transforming the industry's understanding of care and wellness environments. And she's a frequent speaker at leading healthcare industries and conferences, and she's actively engaged in student career development. And she is also a member of our National Board of Directors. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Dawn. Hi, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well. Thank you again for joining us today. So I'm going to kick us off with the first question about connection. I think everyone these days is seeking real, authentic connections with each other. So I'm gonna push this one over to Margie first. What kind of connections are your clients seeking, and what are the strategies that you're utilizing in your office?
Yeah, I think that healthcare and health systems in general are really trying to connect with their communities in a very meaningful, impactful way. You know, ever since the Affordable Care Act, they've really been responsible for the demographic that they serve. And so we are seeing just a great deal of community engagement. And one of the things that we do is when we are starting out a project, we'll do focus groups, we'll do advisory groups. I had a really fun advisory group a couple of years ago, toughest one I've ever had. It was a bunch of kids for a children's hospital. And we should have asked them very early on, but we decided, well, let's just bring them in after we do the design. We'll show them the fully baked product here. And oh my goodness, they had such great ideas, but it really transformed our thinking and how we actually had to retool the design, if you will, but in very good ways. And I think the end result was awesome. But these are the types of things that we're doing in healthcare.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And Julia, in our prep, you talked about the increasing issues with loneliness, right? You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, the Global World Happiness Report came out recently, and for the first time ever, the young are more lonely than the old. Typically, it happens in reverse as you age, you know, and you start to lose the people that you love. You know, increase in loneliness is natural as a form of life progression. And I think it's really interesting to start to think about why young people are so lonely when we are more connected than we have ever been. And it really has to do, after I read that, I started doing some research, and it really has to do with the way that our brains synchronize with each other. A lot of what we are considering as connection through either social media or text messaging, even a little bit of hybrid work, you know, that is all what's called asynchronous connection. It's not happening in real time. In your brain, you don't get the full benefit of connecting with somebody when it's not happening in real time. And so for us, really trying to get people back into the office, getting those synchronous moments that you can have with somebody, whether that's during a meeting or over a cup of coffee, but the drive to connect is more important than it's ever been.
Yeah, and talking about this idea of connected culture, David, what are you seeing in your practice?
I think the observation is a really good one. That there's connected culture in a way that if it is all by electronic means or asynchronous means, there's in I know other folks that I've talked to have seen this even in their young staff or their younger children. The social skills have maybe not developed as much. They don't have to talk to people as much in person and in real time. Yeah. So I think that's something that has to be built. It's something that could be restored, and by providing places for people to engage with each other, not just at the desk, not just in a conference room, but in other casual ways, and providing those different venues for engagement, really encourages people to come together and connect in a meaningful way.
Yeah. I don't know if the term circling around the water cooler exists anymore, right? This idea.
Yeah,
of
what's
like,
a water cooler?
What is, yeah,
right, that should be a trivia question.
a virtual one.
And I know several of us were in a large firm leadership forum, and one of the firm's leaders was talking about their internship program went from, I think, like 200 applicants a year up to something like 1,200.
Right.
we were kind of talking about like what's driving that, and they think one of the reasons is because these people want to come back in and be connected to the office again. So I thought that was really interesting.
And I think that builds, I mean, that student population, I think that really speaks to some of what we're seeing with kids who went through and did either a significant portion of their design education remotely. Yeah. They're craving being with other people, and so I think that's been an interesting shift. So there's a mix for sure, but I think there's a real drive to kind of get in person and learn, simultaneously. Right.
And I'm going to go off script a little bit, but talking about that, you said there is definitely a demand, but also the idea of like neurodivergent or neurodiversity within the office culture too. So I think you guys as designers have to really balance that out, right?
Right.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Exactly.
It's not connected all the time, but there's got to be room for that. I'm just curious, how many of you are in a hybrid work situation right now? We're just kind of curious. Yeah. That's interesting. That leads me to my next question, which is about this idea of hybrid being the new norm. With most employees working about 3 days a week on average, sometimes you get to choose your day. Sometimes it's coordinated or curated for you. David, how are you helping your clients bring people back into the office?
Several ways. I think one of those is providing the social spaces that they can gather in different ways. I think if it's trying to get people in at the same time, there's a conversation around policy even, and then how do you design for that so that if everybody's in at the same time, you have room for them all. Yeah. If people are there only part of the week, then that offers up some other flexibility. But I think it's really looking at the accommodating the best example, the best case scenario, to where everybody has a seat, everybody has a place to connect, and then really working with them on the soft part of that, which is we can design a space for something to happen, but if the policies are not in sync with that, it may not be effective. Right.
And Margie, with your line of work, I imagine you can't have a doctor who says, I'm going to come in only when I want to, right? So
here we go. And it's just the opposite because, of course, in healthcare, they didn't go home, and they don't generally work remote. There's some who do, but so really the opposite is happening. It's not about bringing people in, but it's keeping them in. It's retention. And particularly with the providers, we all know, you've read the reports, you've seen it on news channels, just the burnout in the healthcare industry is palpable. And because of that, health systems are really trying to understand the dynamics of what is going to keep people interested. Because of course, like nurses, for instance, so many nurses have left the profession. They were wiped out. And I have to be honest with you, I spent a couple of years of my career working at a health system, and let me tell you, nurses are my heroes. They're amazing. And so I can only imagine what occurred during the pandemic. But what's really beautiful about this is that health systems are really putting the spotlight on staff spaces and support spaces. So not only where they might get respite or where they might have some social connection to other providers, but also their workspaces as well. So it's really interesting. One thing I want to mention, because I thought this was just fascinating, I work with a researcher who has studied this about nurses, excuse me, during the pandemic. And the number one place that a nurse had respite during the pandemic was in the restroom. And that is astounding. We can do better than that. And really, we are. And health systems are super supportive. So when we talk about experiential design, Before the pandemic, it was mostly patient experience and a little bit visitor experience. Now it's provider experience, right up there with patient, and I love it. It's just so holistic. It's taking everyone into account.
Yeah, and well, and with the nature of healthcare, it's not a 9-to-5 situation either. Right?
No, there's 3 shifts.
Yeah, which even adds more complexity to the situation. That's really interesting.
Good point.
Yeah, Julia, I remember kind of following you guys, you and Jen doing work at Ford. I mean, you had a lot of people to deal with, right?
Oh, yeah.
And lots of different needs and lots of different types of work dynamics. Can you talk about your strategies in dealing with such a large workforce, a global workforce, right?
Yeah, so when everybody went home from Ford, not only did they not have like the technology to support, they also didn't have policy to support. There were policy that prohibited a lot of the employees from working from home. It wasn't allowed, and then overnight it had to be possible. So that was a big shift. And then when we were home and settled and were ready to start entertaining the conversations of future of work, it was so interesting because they came to myself and Jen and said, what does the future of work look like? And what they expected from us was a floor plan study and 6-foot dots and new renderings of like are desks even valid anymore, and like it was a design exercise in their minds. And for us, it was a conversation instead. And so we had to really fundamentally look at what does work mean now, and what does it mean in the future. And it really became a cultural study to understand if Ford wants to be here in the future, whatever that looks like, what do we need to do to ensure that that can happen? And so instead it became 9 guiding principles to support employees in whatever work modality they decided was best for them. In dealing with such a large, complex, multifaceted workforce, what we decided to do was roll out a work from anywhere policy. So you had the power to choose when, where, how work was conducive for you. So whatever that looked like, whether that was coming into the office or working from home, whether that was 9 to 5 or 5 to 9, you were really empowered to make the choice that was best for you. And pre-pandemic, I think we were at like we were at about like a 75% occupancy rate, just given vacations and sick leave and things like that. Post-pandemic, we were at like a 60-65. So even though we had, kind of reimagined a lot of our facilities, just giving people that autonomy and that choice really was a really big cultural transformation, I would say, more than anything.
Yeah, and were you able to put into place measurements of productivity, or how did that work?
That was really handled within the departments themselves. So for us, our kind of responsibility stopped there. We did measure some things like occupancy, but we were just getting into starting to measure things like employee sentiment instead. So kind of shifting some of those metrics that we were looking at. It wasn't really anymore about like bums and seats and how full are our buildings, but instead how happy and how well are our employees feeling now.
Yeah. Again, I just want to do, I love that we have so many here so we can get some just kind of survey of the room. How many of you place that kind of flexibility as your number 1 priority, your number 2 priority versus salary? So flexible workspaces or schedule? Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I'm gonna move into cross specialties, right? With the lines, COVID did such a number on that, with the lines blurring so much between work and play and healing and so forth. The design teams had to start to become more, had to adjust to deal with that as well, right? So if you could speak to us about that. Julie, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, sure. I think with the rise in all of the more amenity-rich spaces that are being utilized for those points of connection, multidisciplinary focuses coming in, so more like retail, more hospitality, and those are, kind of what is being sought after. A lot more research. We are seeing a really high desire for clients in the strategy department, really wanting to understand what should they be doing, not just what is everybody else doing, but what's right for me. So that's very optimistic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And versus just the traditional designers, were there other specialists that you were bringing in, and what kind were they? I'm curious to
At
know.
Ford we were, we called them our team of ologists. So we were, we had anthropologists, sociologists, human behavioral specialists that were kind of part of our core team that were really focusing on the shift in human behavior and human expectations. So instead of just thinking, okay, what kind of free coffee can we give them, or what kind of amenities, it was really trying to understand, what do people need, what do they expect. There's kind of this conversation around like a frictionless experience, or earning somebody's commute. How can we make their commute and their time spent in the office as seamless as possible? So really understanding human behavior and what people are starting to expect out of the world around them.
Yeah, interesting. Earning people's commute, that's really an interesting
that's a good
term.
one.
Yeah. And David, what about you? What are you seeing?
So I would agree, the hospitality overlap is certainly coming into play for workplace and for building owners in their public spaces. So like we see the security guard is now a concierge. There's somebody that's, instead of being behind a desk, they might be out walking the floor with an iPad and greeting people as they come in.
Yeah.
And so it's a different way of thinking about the guest experience, or the tenant experience.
Yeah.
And the conversations we've been having is challenging everybody to think about earning the commute. Your experience starts at the moment you park your car. And so what is that like? Does it feel safe going from the garage through the lobby to your desk? How can that be elevated? And so some of that is those personal touches and more human interaction, like with the concierge service.
So with healthcare, we're talking about the experience begins on your smartphone.
Oh, sure.
Because most people are queuing into their MyChart or something, and so I mean we're talking about experience in very different ways than we were 10 years ago, for sure.
Yeah.
Although this whole idea of, I like to call it cross-pollinization. I'm a gardener. I like things that relate to flowers and things. But and especially in healthcare. I mean, we've been talking about hospitality and healthcare for at least 15, 20 years. Retail is also a part of healthcare. I mean, when you think about a hospital campus, a healthcare campus, they can be 30, 40, 50 acres, and they're little communities, microcosms unto themselves. So, I mean, you have workplace solutions. Yes, you have sometimes retail. Definitely hospitality, interestingly enough, the word hospital and hospitality. Right. What's really been kind of interesting, though, since the pandemic is this whole overlay of residential. I mean, residential design has had a beautiful moment during pandemic, John. And I love it. Two of my best friends are residential designers, and we talk about it all the time. Even in healthcare, especially like in a behavioral health situation, where it is a little bit more residential. So why are we making this like a hospital? Why are we making it like an institution? What are those characteristics of what makes a house a home? And how can we somehow adapt that? We can't do everything, but how do we bring that in? And I think it's great. And even the way we practice now, I mean, this cross-pollination of disciplines. And I mean, at CannonDesign, we're really making a very concerted effort the last year and a half to kind of flatten out all these silos that we've had of uber specialization of healthcare and education and corporate commercial. And now we're bringing people onto projects that have not done healthcare before. Now, of course, we're not letting them go on their own, but we're working together and we're learning together and we're making better projects together. It's really wonderful. And the interesting thing is, Leah and I were talking about this. I mean, when I graduated from college, we were generalists in that regard. And then over the years, we became very specialized. And it's really great to see things come full circle, and it does work.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting you were saying about the experience starting at the phone. I mean, I think time is the most valuable thing we have, right? And I just remember being old enough to remember going to the doctor's office and just dreading sitting there for like an hour waiting, filling out forms, waiting for your appointment, your number to be called, so to speak. But now, most of that's done before on your phone before you even get there, right? So there's that user experience component of a new type of person that's coming into the design team that's working with you to deal with that.
Absolutely.
Right?
I mean, we have people on our teams that just focus on that.
Yeah. So by the
really
time you
cool.
get there, you're not so stressed about it, and you're not feeling well. So that's.
And even the concept that David was talking about, a concierge. I mean, some of our clients actually have a concierge with a tablet that greets people at the door.
Yeah.
And, it truly transforms the experience.
That's great. That's great. I'm going to stick with you, Margie, for a minute here.
Uh-oh.
As companies and designers think holistically and more intentionally about creating environments that support better human health, right? Many are increasingly recognizing the interconnectedness of individual health, community health, and environmental stewardship. As a healthcare specialist with Canon, what should we as designers be considering when designing environments that promote better health outcomes? That was a lot, but that's what I had to
well, of course, I mean, we're all today concerned about the ingredients that are going into the products that we specify, and so we do have that ability to bring to our clients the healthiest products. Now in healthcare, it becomes a little bit of a balancing act, I have to admit, because you're dealing with something that has some of the harshest cleaning protocols, especially after the pandemic. I mean, before the pandemic, we were really heading on a good path, and then the pandemic hit, and you can imagine, I mean, they were cleaning things with bleach solutions, and even vinyl fabrics were blistering and peeling, and so it's that balancing act. But in general, our clients are definitely elevating that conversation about healthy environments, interior environments, and one of our clients, actually we're doing this right now, we're in the planning stages of a large bed tower. And on each floor, they have a sunroom. Now this is in a northern climate, so the sun is very important, but it's a southwest exposure, it's in a corner room, and actually one of the windows opens. And I know that probably seems so basic to everybody else, but in healthcare, that is not usually the standard. And now patients and or staff have the ability to they will have this ability to go into this room, take a break, get some fresh air, be inspired by the view. It's a beautiful view out at this southwest corner. And then another client of ours, they actually put a stairwell adjacent to the entry of the hospital. And it's all glass, it's illuminated at night, it's beautiful, it's like a beacon. But they did this primarily to really encourage people to physically use the stairs as opposed to just the elevator. And so, it's things like that really trying to elevate the human experience. And, this one's a fun one. One of our clients, they have a series of medical office buildings, and of course it's in a warmer climate, but they do have food trucks that come at lunchtime, and they come in their parking lot. And our clients are thinking about all sorts of things: the air, the food, the water, the view, the exercise that they're providing.
Yeah. That's amazing. And this reminds me, during one of our conversations, Julia, you had said something about place as preventative medicine, right? That was a really cool phrase. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've done a lot of judging with ASID in recent years of like portfolio competitions and grants and things like this. And a lot of people have the common mission of when, becoming an interior designer, of realizing how much time is spent indoors. And so being able to have, a really large impact or have a career that has such a substantial impact on people's lives. And so I think when we think about that, designing places for people to thrive and not just to work or to live, but to really be better, more holistic versions of ourselves. And when we take the care to make standards like not using materials that have red list chemicals, and we really put some firm edges and some boundaries on what we're willing to do and to incorporate into the built environment, I do think that place can serve as preventative medicine, even outside of healthcare. It's great that healthcare exists because when we get sick, we need a place to go. But could the rest of the environmental ecosystems that we live in and that we work in help us avoid some of, time spent in healthcare? So I think if we just kind of turn up the level of consciousness that we all have as designers and architects, that we could build some pretty incredible places.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Love that.
Yeah. David, the demand for interior design services keeps fluctuating, right? It depends on regions and so forth. And can you talk about some of the experience you're having in your firm regarding that?
Yeah, it is fluctuating. It's really market specific and sometimes even sector specific within a given market. So, but I think some of the things we're talking about here today are finding their way into the conversations in each of those. So the human experience at airports, for example, is a major focus, and of bringing people in kind of a seamless way, making sure that that's understanding how people move through space, making sure that there's places to rest for people who are mobility impaired or just move slower than others. So there's things like that, and I think there's still a growing demand for services because, as you said, I think just there's more awareness that came out of the pandemic of how the built environment affects our health and our well-being. Yeah. So I think there's more appetite for it. I think there's hesitancy to commit as people are looking at, in the corporate environments, where do we spend the capital? Do we invest in completely retooling? We're not sure what's going to happen going up or down. I think there's still some uncertainty around hybrid environments and hybrid policies that are kind of driving that indecision. Yeah. So I think there's an opportunity for us to counsel and to guide and to help them think strategically about those futures. And it's, again, engaging their HR people to talk about policies, to talk about how to make the experience while they are in the spaces we design, help them thrive, help them be healthier. Yeah. And I think there's certainly ways that we can do that. Yeah.
More and more. I mean, we don't really talk about this openly, but that the HR component is now at the seat of the table when it comes to design. It seems like more
absolutely,
so than ever, right?
Absolutely, and especially when we look at pandemic and hybrid and all of that aside, if anybody is pursuing like the WELL building standard for their spaces, there's a lot of policy wrapped up in that. Yeah. And it's all kind of guiding a lot of other decisions. So the HR team has to be engaged in that. Yeah. And I think more clients are recognizing that it's not just the real estate or the design and construction departments within large corporations. They are bringing that human element because they know they have to take care of their people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Margie, within healthcare, I mean, talking about having to be flexible and resilient, can you talk about the things that you're seeing through your practice?
Yeah, well, the one good thing about healthcare design is that it's generally a consistent pipeline. I mean, there's always work that needs to be done. Now, granted, we see ebbs and flows with, let's say, new construction, but then there's always renovation and expansion that needs to be done. And so, you know, I think what we're seeing is something that Amanda Schneider, the other day we were talking to her at the Nexus Forum, and she was talking about how ThinkLab has done a study, and years ago you may have had a handful of decision makers at a more corporate level. But today, you could have 3 times that many people. And I have definitely seen that in my practice. We were just talking about that at a leadership level at CannonDesign. And it's a good thing, but it's just a different way of approaching a project and understanding the client. There's a lot more layers to the decision-making process, and so sometimes we're seeing our process, our design process, we all know it can be linear, but I am definitely finding it's much more circular today because you know, clients will have you work on a concept, for instance, and then they'll say, well, you know, we're going to take this around, we're going to really mull this over for 3 to 6 months, and then we're going to come back. And now this is in healthcare. I don't know what it's like in commercial, but and that is not atypical. You will see that, and I think that it's also reflective of the uncertainty of the times we are in.
Sure. Yeah.
And you can imagine healthcare was hit pretty hard by the pandemic. So I think that that's some of what we're seeing. But you know, at Canon we do education and corporate and civic. But we're definitely seeing that where there's more decision makers, very sophisticated decision-making processes. And of course that is a good thing. But it sometimes takes a lot longer.
Okay, that's great. I know we're running out of time. I wanted to make sure we cover a little bit about AI. I think there are 2 things about AI I want to cover. I'm going to start with you, David. As far as like thought leadership continues to be an integral part of any digital marketing strategy, right? And many are utilizing AI to amplify their reach in firms. So can you talk a little bit about what you have found to be effective in that?
I know there's a lot of discussion around it. I don't know that we've, other than trying to let those types of systems better identify the target market or the target audience for the message, and being able to tune more specifically. So I think getting even more targeted than they already are can be one of the ways that that's effective. And I think AI can do a lot for that, where that might have been either, I mean, it was already happening with like clicks and likes and other kinds of inputs, but there's other ways that I think AI tools could be doing that kind of market research and helping refine who those messages go to, and do it so much faster, where you can be much more responsive.
What about workflow or the design process itself? Are you guys utilizing?
There are some things in workflow that we're seeing and utilizing, experimenting with. One of the things that we're doing with kind of design process is training AI systems on our own work. So we're trying to, everybody's concerned about the work getting out there, or your work being put out into some other data set that can be trained on your own work, and then it gets diluted, it gets put out there in ways that weren't intended. So by controlling it to our own data, we have better control over those outputs, and more authorship and more control. So there's, I think there are ways for, as people are going to start testing and trying, I'm hopeful that more people will embrace it as a way to think of it as augmented intelligence, that we are augmenting our own thought processes and our own design processes, and not as something that's replacing anybody or anything. And it's, for those of us who've been doing this a while, we remember when CAD was like the big threat, and then Revit was a big threat, and then I think this is an evolution of technological tools that can really elevate what we do next. if for no other reason than the more data we collect,
Yeah.
right? I mean, there's more insights we can gain from that by enabling some of these tools to be used.
Yeah, yeah. And Julia, what have you found with the technology?
Well, whatever I say next is my own personal opinion and not reflective of interior architects. I think I had a group of students ask me last year at Gather if it was still valuable to learn how to render. And the answer is yes, absolutely.
Always?
Always. Yes, learn your skills. To me, my experience with AI from a visual medium standpoint is it's much like being a creative director. So the better prompts that you give it, the better outcomes you're going to get.
Right.
And it's much like how you give feedback to up-and-coming designers or a design team. If you're looking to get a certain result or coach or mentor, the better you are at delivering those inputs, the better response you'll get back. So I think it's a valuable tool to develop in terms of learning how to give prompts to get something back that you're looking for. And I think there's a lot of tech CEOs that are saying right now it's not that AI will take your job, but it's the person that knows how to use AI will take your job.
There you go.
So valuable skill to learn, but make sure that you're still learning those skills and
You're in
those
the
rendering
driver's
tools
seat.
on your
Yeah,
own. Yep.
that's interesting. Margie, what about in healthcare?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've definitely been using it.
Yeah.
But I would have to say, right now, there's been a bunch of conversations just about this whole thing of ownership, and so we are treading very cautiously ahead. But it is a very cool tool. But the one thing that it won't replace is the human interaction between the designer and the client. They trust you. And whatever tool you use to formulate or create your design, it's the individual, the person that they trust. And I don't think that will ever change. And so I look at it as a different tool. It will change the way we work in much the same way that David was talking about with the whole CAD, because actually I have used that as an example because I've had these conversations too with staff about what if and what's to come.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, thank you. Looking at that clock, we have about 10 minutes to see if we have some questions in the audience for our panelists. Who would like to ask some questions? Who wants to be the first person? It's a tough position to be in, but you can do it. You guys raise your hands. I know there's people that are running mics around. Any questions? Yep, there's one in the back there. Yeah.
All right, this is a corporate workplace question, but I think it applies to a lot of things. I used to work in commercial design, and desks and personal space and office space and your place at the office was definitely shrinking as technology got smaller, the desks were getting smaller, real estate prices were also helping with that commodity. And now that technology is wireless and we can work anywhere and all of those things, and now technology is part of the design team actively. How does that change the look of a design office?
Change a design office.
I would say an interesting thing I think has happened in like individual spaces. The me spaces have maybe gotten fewer, and in some organizations where they don't have they may oversubscribe their spaces, meaning there's we're planning for 110 people but we only have seats for 100 or something like that. A lot of organizations are still keeping one-to-one, which I think is interesting, and that's so that they are imagining a scenario where everybody could be there. But I think as the individual spaces get smaller, the total footprint might not, because there's a recognition that the reason to be in a shared space, to work on a shared objective, is to meet with other people. And so a variety of spaces to support that in all of its forms is, I think, starting to consume some more of a commercial footprint and reallocate the space that might have otherwise been to an individual desk.
Great question. Anyone else? What's the next question? Yep, there's one up here. Oh, there's one down.
I'd like to direct this question at David. You mentioned early in the conversation reference to social spaces. And I find when we present that to some of our clients, they bristle a little bit thinking that that's a coffee room or more than that. What's your perspective on how that affects how people are working today?
I think it's, so a couple things, I guess, on that. One is social spaces can mean any number of things. It can be celebrating the birthdays of the month of the staff. It could be hosting an event. It can be a variety of things. It could also be that same space might be a place for a town hall meeting, or might be a space for a collaborative effort. It might be the cafe or something like that. So I think that one of the ways that we try to approach that is to talk about social spaces in all of what social means, and it's entertainment. It's connecting with others in a different way. But then recognizing too that a social space might be a quiet corner where there's no technology, and I can sit and have a one-on-one conversation with somebody and connect in a meaningful way. So I think it's tapping into what's important to the organization, and how do they value the connection between people, and finding ways to make that happen through the design of the space in a really intentional way. And so maybe we have a better name for social space might be the thing we have to work on, and how we term that.
Another thing is, as you can imagine, at Ford Motor Company, there were a lot of very conservative leaders, and we had a really hard time, and I think a lot of companies struggle with the soft seating that's like intermixed within a workplace, and that it just like doesn't get utilized. And so what we had to really uncover is people's perception of work. And so is there a cultural undertone of, if you're sitting in a social space, you're actually not perceived as working? And so it's like really getting to kind of like the ways of thinking and the cultural perceptions of what these postures mean and look like. And I think that can also be a good place to start, because a variety of postures is incredibly beneficial to your overall thought process throughout a day. Changing up where you work has immense benefit. And so getting those spaces in and getting cultures to adapt to use them is very influential to innovation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of that comes from the leadership demonstrating that it's okay.
Yep.
That there's those interactions are happening as part of the workday,
right,
as part of the workflow.
Yeah. I think we had a question right here. Yeah.
So my question, as our time has changed, a lot of things have changed around us, that as designers, there's just a lot more complexity you have to design for. So I'm thinking about in built spaces where there's neurodiversity, where there's multiple generations. I'm thinking about like an airport, if you're worried about old people, but you're also worried about young people, and there's a space for mothers and people speaking different languages. So it just feels like there's a lot more complexity as you're designing, and something that you're optimizing for one group could actually be something that doesn't work for another group. So I'm just curious how that's built into your process, and does that, as you mentioned, make everything take so much longer to figure out, and how do you make those compromises?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, I mean, for hospitals, we've always had to consider everybody. Mm-hmm. And so we do demographic studies, that's number one, and ethnographics. We do have a strategy group at CannonDesign, Blue Cottage of Cannon, and they do all sorts of research so that we can then start to create personas. You're probably all familiar with that, with experiential design. Some people call them avatars, but that start to represent some of the major groups. But I think it's really, we have to check ourselves. We really do. My big thing right now is designing for this age wave that's going to be hitting the hospitals and health systems. And are we really taking into account how we design for that demographic, because we're kind of doing it, but we're not being as deliberate, I think. And it's really tricky, but it's a balancing act, and our clients want to know about that. And they want to hear about the various demographics, and it's just, it's really fascinating. Actually, to me, that's some of the best part of what we do at the very onset of a project, is that research and trying to understand who is it that we're designing for. But with the hospital, anybody could walk through the door.
Yeah.
I hope that answered your
Elizabeth,
question.
that question is interesting. Those who have flown, I'm sure you've seen now, you're now taking in consideration pets, right? Like pet refuge areas that don't look so bad anymore, right? They're like nice little parks.
Sure.
Those who do yoga, right? All of a sudden now we have yoga rooms in
should.
airports and so
Yeah.
forth. Yeah, so it's
I do
interesting
yoga.
too. What's that? Are
I
you
do
one of those
yoga,
that uses that
I'm
room?
one of those.
But I think too, there's an idea, and we talk about when we're designing for neurodiversity. If you're designing for a divergent or for the margins of a population, then you're probably also serving the typical. And so it just broadens our thinking about what good design is by being more considerate of more things that the environment can not hinder someone from being able to thrive in that environment.
Yeah, great. I think we have time for one more question. Yep.
Yes, going to change the topic just a little bit. And thank y'all all for being here, and especially Julia. We worked together. And I was chasing Ford and met her and said, this is a brilliant mind. I got to work with this lady. So thank you for being here. But I think COVID gets too much credit for this shift. It's an excuse to me. I think we need to quit talking about it. It's just that our society needed something different. If we didn't have, if COVID would have happened in 2010 or 2015, we didn't have laptops. The laptop is what gave companies the position to take people home and work from home.
True.
Yeah.
So my question, and then you mentioned a concierge where you touch a pad, or a young man or a woman comes up and says, hey, where do you want to go? I don't want a person that looks like they should be in a restaurant. I want someone that makes me feel comfortable, safe. So I think the humanistic needs to come back. So I want to ask all y'all, technology, the phone, the laptop, social media, that's what has separated us from being human beings and being a part of, the being with each other. That's been around forever.
Right.
So how can technology shift and make people come back together? That's what I want to see. Not, you push a button and you get a room and you go in. That's bullshit. That's not where we want to go. How does technology work for us? That's the question.
Yeah. That's a great question.
It's a great question. I was starting to think about, AI has so much possibility. And we've talked a bit about smart buildings to intuitive buildings, and how artificial intelligence can actually just remove a lot of the friction. So instead of the phone being, the primary way that you book a desk or book a conference room, perhaps it's AI that just plugs in and it knows. And so every morning when you wake up, you already have your desk because that's pre-booked for you. It can cross-reference calendars and get you a desk near a meeting room that you're going to be in all day. It can, pre-order you lunch if it sees you have back-to-backs. So I think that there are some interesting possibilities of what artificial intelligence can do for us that almost lets us forget that we have a phone. It does all the work for us, and we don't have to constantly check or worry about where am I going next? Do I have a desk? Do I have a room? It becomes a more intuitive process.
I think there's a possibility there too with okay, you're going to be in meetings all day, or you need to collaborate with so-and-so. Let's make sure y'all are near each other, or that you're kind of coordinating calendars.
Yeah.
I think there could be automated things that way. I appreciate that I see even just in software that's available on my desktop today, is these are the people you collaborate with the most. You haven't talked to this person in 3 days. You should probably give them a call. So I think there's ways that the by understanding our behaviors and helping prompt us to maybe do things that we are otherwise distracted from doing, I think is a real potential.
Yeah, and well, I keep going back to what I know in healthcare, but healthcare is a very high tech, but high touch. And I think that, there's a place for both. And, it just goes back to that whole conversation about human interaction. I mean, there's a certain feeling that you get from being with other human beings that you cannot get from watching them on a screen or listening to them even just on a phone. And I think that we are definitely still in a place of imbalance, and it's, what is it going to take to create that balance between the technology that we have and the lifestyle that we're living. If we have all these people who feel very lonely and yet they're super connected, there's something wrong with that. And
Yeah.
I don't have the answer for that today, but I do think that there are people who are definitely studying that, and we all have skin in that game.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of interesting. I watch my in-laws and my mother, who are elderly, and they can barely use technology. And it's just a reminder of, and really the thing that's most important to them is that we show up.
Well, like a phone call, right?
Yeah.
Instead of a text, your mom was great.
But even just showing up and just being there. And so I hope I truly hope that that's the legacy that we leave each generation, is just showing up.
That's a great way to end this. Thank you, Margie, David, Julia. Can we advance the slide? There you go. These are our QR codes to our reports, and I hope that everyone gets a chance to take a look at them and also join ASID. Thank you, everyone.